Welcome into another quick shot coming to you from the Fantasy Football Intervention Team. I'm Taylor Cornell. You can find me at _Taylor Cornell out on the Twitter sphere. And today's quick shot brings forth a young workhorse running back that has divided the fantasy football community.
All right, who wants a shot? Quick shots.
Who is it? None other than Chicago Bears running back David Montgomery. Montgomery started the year slow. He was running back 21, weeks 1 through 11. He did miss a game during that time frame, but pretty unimpressive. A low-end RB2. Until the last 4 weeks, he has absolutely blown up. Sits at RB6 overall right now through 15 weeks. He's been the overall RB1 during the past month. Absolutely amazing stretch he's on. The Montgomery truthers are standing loud, they're standing proud, and the doubters, on the other hand, are pointing to his recent strength of schedule or lack thereof, downgrading a little bit of what he's accomplished. Who's right? Who's wrong? Well, let's first look at that strength of schedule. The opponents that David Montgomery has faced. In the first 9 games, he faced 6 top 10 defenses, and he averaged almost 14 PPR points per game, pretty consistent with a mid RB2 type of production. He only faced 1 bottom 10 defense during the first 9 games, and he scored just 8 PPR points, and that was back in week 1. A small sample size against the top defense. But then at the last 4 games, he's had defenses ranked 10th, 29th, 31st, and 23rd, respectively, against the run, and he's averaged 26.5 PPR points per game during that stretch. So yes, the competition here down the stretch hasn't been strong, but it doesn't look like there's much correlation prior to this stretch to show that Montgomery struggles a lot against tough defenses. After all, he did have an 18-point and 21-point game against the first and 7th best run defenses earlier this season. So the strength of schedule thing is a little overblown. Next, let's look, though, at his opportunity. So in the first 9 games where he struggled a bit, he averaged about 18 touches per game, 4 yards per touch. The last 4 games, slightly more, 21 touches, but it's his yards per touch. His efficiency has really increased up to 7.6. Touches overall haven't changed too much. The efficiency has. Now, it is important to note that in the Green Bay game and Houston game, he had 57 and 80-yard plays, which inflate those numbers a little bit. You can't take those runs away, nor can you take away the fantasy points that were accrued in those plays, but it is something to note that a couple very long plays are somewhat inflating that number a bit. Speaking of efficiency, though, when you look at some of the other metrics in his first 9 games, Montgomery was 46th among running backs in points per snap, according to PFF. Looking at other efficiency metrics, though, in the first 9 games, Montgomery ranked 46th among running backs in points per snap, according to PFF, sitting at 0.26 PPR points per snap. Guys that had a better PPR points per snap than Montgomery during that time frame included Brian Hill, David Johnson, Rex Burkhead. Absolutely abysmal company to be in there. In points per touch in the first 9 games, David Montgomery sat 51st with 0.69. So extremely low metrics there for efficiency to start the season. Since then, over this last month during this torrid stretch, Montgomery ranks 3rd in points per snap, behind only Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry, and he ranks 7th in points per touch at 1.26. Are those numbers sustainable, though? Well, if we look at last year, the 0.52 points per snap, which is what Montgomery is currently sitting at over his last 4 games, would have tied Austin Eckler for number 1 overall in the league. So extremely high numbers there. And if you look at the 1.26 yards per touch he's been averaging over the last month, that would have put Montgomery 3rd in the league among running backs of those that had at least 100 PPR points. For some perspective, Christian McCaffrey last year, who of course was extremely involved in his offense and was the overall RB1, was at 1.16 yard per touches. So Montgomery would have exceeded that if he was able to produce what he's been doing over the last month over an entire season. So Montgomery's been more efficient, obviously, in this great stretch, but it's fair to wonder how sustainable that is. Finally, let's look at some of David Montgomery's opportunities. So looking at his snaps and targets, comparing this year to last year, the biggest difference is the absence of Tariq Cohen, who was injured in the 3rd game of the season in 2020. This season, Montgomery's enjoyed 8 games with at least 70% snap share and 8 games with 4 or more targets. Last year, with Cohen in the fold, Montgomery only saw 3 games out of the 16 that he played where he had a 70% snap share, and also only saw 3 games where he had 4 or more targets. All of the games this year where Montgomery has seen 4 or more targets have come since the Cohen injury early in the year. So while Tariq Cohen being out does appear to impact Monty's usage so far, it's important to note that while Montgomery may be talented and more talented than Tariq Cohen, Cohen is signed in Chicago for the near future. We would assume that when he comes back, he is going to, again, assume the pass catching role in this offense, as he doesn't bring as much to the game as a running back, running the ball between the tackles. That would obviously then cap a bit of Montgomery's upside for next year. And when we look at Montgomery's usage in the passing game, having 8 games so far with at least 4 targets, that has obviously helped lift Montgomery's PPR points naturally, points per reception. He's getting more opportunities there. And when we look at the percentage of his fantasy points that have come as a direct result of his rushing yards and total touchdowns, it's actually less in 2020 than it was in 2019. However, the big difference is the receiving game. So 36% of David Montgomery's PPR fantasy points so far this year have been as a result of the receptions and receiving yards that he's seen. That's compared to just 25.5% last year. So if the receiving production does take a considerable dip when Cohen returns, it's going to obviously hurt the PPR appeal of David Montgomery, cap his ceiling considerably. And unless Montgomery is able to become a touchdown monster like Aaron Jones was last year or Derrick Henry's been the last couple years, I think Montgomery is going to struggle to produce RB1 numbers for fantasy. So in the battle of David Montgomery victory laps, who's the winner in the end? In my opinion, I think Montgomery is a good sell candidate in many situations for fantasy. If I'm rebuilding, he's entering his age 24 season next year. That's not old by any means. But he hasn't shown the elite production that I'm willing to hold on to players as they get a little bit older at the running back position. He hasn't shown that elite ability yet, in my opinion, over a sustained stretch of time. And I don't think his upside is as high as what I'm chasing at that position. So my philosophy in Dynasty leans more towards trying to secure top-end running backs that have high-end RB1 potential. And I don't think Montgomery fits the bill there. If I'm a middle-of-the-road team, he also isn't really helping put me over the top. So I would be looking to move him in those situations as well. A contending team, though, looking for a solid RB2 or flex option could definitely do worse than David Montgomery. He has shown what he can do when things break the right way for him the last month or so. I think all in all, Montgomery's a fine player. He's a fine fantasy asset. And like most things in life, the truth probably is somewhere in the middle. He's not the best running back to ever grace the earth, nor is he the worst player ever. He probably won't be an RB3 type of guy going forward. I also don't think he's a high-end RB1. If anyone in your league is willing to trade for him, valuing him as a mid RB1 type of guy where he currently sits at RB6, they would find a trade partner in me at least. If I could get a mid 2021 first or a late first and a second for Montgomery, I'd be cashing out on this hot streak in expectation that next year his numbers will dip a bit when Cohen returns. Don't forget to check out our other videos on the Fantasy Football Intervention YouTube page, as well as our Twitter account at @JoinOurCircle_.